Welcome back to our next lesson. And here we're going to discuss hazard identification, which of course is the first step in the risk management process where we basically identify hazards. And a reminder from our last lesson again, a hazard is just a potential source of harm. So it's a very open definition. Many things can be considered hazards. The best way I believe there is to conceptualize hazards is as one of the four possible things. So the first one is a source of energy. So that can be things like electrical energy, thermal energy, potential energy, kinetic energy, or radiation, things like ionizing radiation. Another hazard is going to be something related to use. Okay, so that's going to be things like misuse. Or as well, you can have just hazards related to normal use. Maybe in the normal use of your medical device, there is a risk of the patient experiencing pain just during its normal use. Another one we can consider is related to the characteristics of a substance. Okay, and that can be many things. That can be related to biocompatibility. It might be, is the material toxic? Does the material cause an allergic reaction? Etc. And number four, the last one we can consider is failure modes. That is just a risk of a certain component within our device failing, and that then leads to some sort of risk of harm. And the one thing I'll mention here as well is that a lot of people use the terminology DFMEA to refer to designed failure mode and failure effects analysis. And to conduct the DFMEA, basically what you do is you look at the architecture that you've drawn out, if you can remember the architecture we drew out in earlier lessons, and you step through each item within your architecture and you ask what is the likelihood of that item failing, and if it were to fail, what would the resulting harm be to the patient and what would be the severity of that harm, and you can use that as a basis to start driving risk control measures in your own architecture and requirements to reduce the likelihood of failure modes happening in order to make your device more safe and reliable as well. So that's DFMEA in a nutshell. You can see it's a bit intertwined with risk management, and you can think of a hazard can be a failure mode, but it can also be something more broader. So there's a bit of a difference between those two words in that a hazard is generally a broader scope because it's not only a failure mode, it can also be a source of energy related to use or related to the characteristics of a substance, etc. Okay, and so hazard identification is going to be our first step. So we're basically going to look at this and we're going to identify hazards, whatever they are. Electrical energy, okay, and then we're going to have things like misuse. Maybe we look at the battery failing. When it comes to software, there's going to be lots of software related failure modes that we can look at, etc., etc. And that's our starting point, and we're going to move from identifying hazards through to how can they cause harm. And the more important thing, which is what we need to do to actually make our device safe, is what are the risk control measures we can come up with to actually make our device safe. Now, the next thing I'll mention here is basically to get us from hazard to risk, we basically have to derive what is the hazardous situation that can be caused by a hazard. And this term here, hazardous situation, is just another term within the standard, and it is defined as the circumstance in which people, property, or the environment is or are exposed to one or more hazards. Okay, so we'll see more of what exactly is a hazardous situation in the following lessons, and I think I will leave this lesson here and I shall see you in the next.